I walked away from my own wedding because the people I loved decided to humiliate my mother, and that changed everything. My name is Rachel Morgan, and I canceled my wedding halfway through the reception, right after my fiancé laughed, when his mother called mine a mistaken address. I didn't throw a drink. I didn't scream. I just stood up, looked around that $140,000 ballroom and said, "This isn't love. This is erasure dressed in designer tuxedos." You should have seen their faces. Let me back up. That morning, I woke up thinking I was stepping into a fairy tale. White roses lined the driveway. Guests were flying in from San Francisco, Chicago, even London. We had a 6-tier cake flown in from Boston, each layer handmade with imported Belgian chocolate. Every seat had a name card in gold foil. Every flute sparkled. Everything except the people who were supposed to matter most. And at the center of it all, me. Or rather, the version of me that his family wanted me to be. They never liked my mother. They never said it aloud, not at first. But it was in the way they avoided eye contact when she spoke. The way they never used her last name in the program. The way they described her, if they even bothered, with passive-aggressive praise like she's got such grit or so humble. That day she sat beside me in a navy dress she had altered herself. She looked beautiful. Her hair swept into a bun she'd done with the same hands that cut and colored hundreds of women's hair to pay my tuition. Her shoes had a faint scuff on the sole and her purse was secondhand. But her posture straight, calm, dignified. That's the thing about my mom, she's been weathering storms her whole life. That ballroom was just another squall. The music played, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed through that vaulted space. I watched people smile through their teeth. Politicians, architects, philanthropists. People who called themselves changemakers but never learned the names of their waitstaff. And then his father gave a toast. It started well enough, generic praise, lots of "we're so proud," and Rachel brings out the best in Adam. But then he shifted. "Rachel's story is what makes America beautiful," he said, lifting his champagne. "A young woman from modest roots, raised by a single mother, a hairdresser, but look at her now." He paused like he expected applause. "She's living proof that no matter where you come from, you can still end up here." That's what I call a real transformation. The room chuckled politely. My spine went cold. My mother blinked twice and said nothing. I bit my tongue. It wasn't the modest roots that stung. It was the framing, like my life had only begun when Adam entered it. Like my mom's sacrifices were just a quirky backstory. Like I was a dog they pulled from a shelter and cleaned up for show. That's not transformation, that's erasure. And yet I stayed quiet. Until his mother stood and said, "Rachel has a talent that can't be taught. That comes from people like her mother, people with golden hands. No degrees, no accolades, but heart." I looked at my mother then. Her eyes didn't move, but her fingers set down her fork slow and steady. I know that gesture. That's her way of saying, don't react now. But don't forget this either. Then came dessert. Someone said they thought my mom was the caterer. Someone else whispered, "Is she really a stylist? Or just one of those self-taught types?" And Adam, my future husband, laughed. But the final crack, I passed by his mother chatting with a guest and heard it, clear as day. She's beautiful, no doubt. Couture bride through and through, but the mother. She let out a scoff. Honestly, I thought she was someone's +1. That's not a mother. That's a mistake in a dress. And Adam, he chuckled. That was it. I walked back to my table. My mother looked at me and knew. "It's okay, honey," she whispered. "We can take it. It's just one night." "No, Mom, we've taken enough." I stood up, lifted my glass, looked around the room. "Thank you for the evening," I said, my voice steady, "and for the very clear reminder of exactly who I never want to become." And we left. No drama, no shouting. Just two women who had learned over years of being overlooked, underestimated, and judged that quiet exits can echo louder than fireworks. And as I walked past the crystal centerpieces and judgmental smiles, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: freedom. If you've ever been in a room full of people who smiled at you while erasing your truth, leave a comment below. Tell me what gave you the strength to finally walk away. And if this story speaks to you, if you've ever had to choose between silence and dignity, subscribe, like, and share. Maybe it's time the world hears more voices like ours. We didn't run, we didn't cry, we just walked out the front doors of the ballroom, leaving behind the champagne flutes, the overpriced string quartet, and 100 whispers chasing after us. No one stopped us, not even Adam. Especially not Adam. Outside, the air was colder than I remembered, or maybe I was just finally breathing again. My mother walked beside me, silent as ever, her heels clicking steadily against the stone path like she'd rehearsed this moment long ago. I didn't know where we were going. I just knew we couldn't stay there. "Where to?" she asked softly like it was any other evening. "The diner," I said without thinking. "Our spot." She smiled. Perfect. The Westlake Diner had been our escape since I was 10. Back when we couldn't afford heat, some winters when Mom worked 3 jobs and I studied under hair dryers in the back of her salon, we'd end up there, sharing fries, whispering dreams over chipped coffee cups, pretending for just 1 hour that we weren't barely making it. We slid into our old booth, the same red leather cracked at the seams, the same fluorescent buzz above us. A young waitress with a nose ring dropped menus we didn't need. Mom ordered her usual black tea. I ordered coffee even though my hands were still shaking. Across from me, she looked exactly like she did 20 years ago, tired but strong, worn but radiant. I stared at her, trying to understand how anyone could reduce this woman to a punchline. She sipped her tea, looked over her glasses, and said, "You didn't have to do that for me, you know." "I didn't," I said. "I did it for me. You just reminded me what I deserved." We sat in silence for a while, but not the awkward kind, the safe kind. The kind where words aren't necessary. I looked around the diner and saw remnants of my life embedded in every corner. The napkin dispenser where I once doodled floor plans in crayon. The window where I watched snow pile up while Mom wiped my wet hair with her scarf. The booth where we once split a single pancake because payday hadn't come yet. She never once called it suffering. She called it life. And when I got into architecture school on a full scholarship, she just smiled and said, "Told you. That stubborn head of yours is good for something. There's this thing they don't tell you about success. It doesn't erase where you come from. It only makes others more comfortable ignoring it." Adam's family loved that I had a startup. Loved that I spoke on panels, got featured in magazines, had quotes in city planning journals. But they never once asked about the nights Mom rubbed my temples during panic attacks, or the mornings she fed me peanut butter on saltines when we were out of everything else. They loved my grit as long as it was neatly packaged. That night in the diner, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. I had built an entire life trying to be palatable for people who would never respect the parts of me that made me resilient. "Do you regret it?" Mom asked. "No," I said, "not even a little." She nodded, finished her tea, and leaned back. "Well, then what's next?" And there it was, the question that had haunted me for months. What was next? I had an app, a team, a mission. I had people who believed in the work, who wanted to change how cities treated their people. But I also had silence, so much silence. I'd let Adam's family co-opt my voice, my image, my story, all for access to rooms that never welcomed me. Not anymore. The next morning, I opened my laptop and stared at a folder I hadn't touched in weeks. Inside were emails, documents, share agreements. I'd been buying tiny pieces of Urban Core's voting stock through a series of holding firms, legal, clean, strategic. At first it was protection, just in case. Now it felt like purpose. Because if they wanted to use me as a prop, fine. Let's see how they like it when the prop owns the stage. I didn't tell Mom. Not yet, not until it was real. But before we left that booth, I took her hand, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "You're not just a heart of gold, Mom. You're titanium wrapped in grace. And I'm going to make sure the world knows it." She squeezed my fingers. "Just make sure you get some sleep first." When I first told my high school guidance counselor I wanted to study architecture, he blinked at me like I'd mispronounced astronaut. I guess in his eyes, girls from my side of the tracks became hairstylists, not city shapers. He didn't know I'd spent most of my childhood sketching floor plans on diner napkins and coloring facades with coffee stains while waiting for my mom to finish her shift. But it wasn't some glamorous dream. It started with one sentence on a school field trip. I was 16. Our urban design class took a walking tour through downtown alleyways, courtyards, staircases that led to nowhere. One girl asked, "Why are these benches crooked?" And before I could stop myself, I said, "Because the person who built them didn't care who'd sit on them." That one moment cracked something open inside me, a sense of injustice I hadn't been able to name. Why did public space feel like a punishment for being poor? Why were low-income neighborhoods designed like mazes? Why did beauty cost more per square foot? I applied to schools across the country. One responded, Columbia. My acceptance email arrived while Mom was folding laundry on the couch. I didn't even open it out loud. I just burst into tears and handed her the screen. She read it twice, blinked, then said, "So, New York, huh?" We had $312 in the bank. The deposit alone was more than we'd ever saved. I almost turned it down, but she didn't let me. She worked doubles at the salon, took on house calls, and somehow scraped together enough to help me move into a shoebox apartment with a twin mattress and a hot plate. I worked in the library, skipped meals, lived off vending machines, and lost 10 pounds that first semester. But I also found my people urban dreamers, radical thinkers, professors, who believed architecture wasn't just about buildings, but about equity. And somewhere between my second-year burnout and third-year breakthrough, Urban Bloom was born. It started as a side project, an app that mapped out abandoned city lots and allowed residents to vote on community-driven redesigns. Turn a broken courtyard into a garden, a crumbling alley into a public art space. We weren't trying to be revolutionary, we were just tired of waiting. 3 years later, the city noticed. A grant came, then a partnership, then a TED Talk invitation I never accepted because the timing didn't feel right. That's when Urban Core came calling. Adam Kramer walked into a city planning panel like he owned the skyline. He was all polished charm representing his family's real estate group, with confidence and PowerPoint slides full of graphs. I was there representing Urban Bloom. We disagreed loudly on nearly everything. He pitched luxury mixed-use developments. I asked why none of them included a single swing set. He rolled out data on ROI. I rolled out pictures of abandoned courtyards and the kids who turned them into playgrounds with duct tape and scrap wood. Afterward, he approached me with a smirk. "You treat architecture like art," he said. "I want to learn that from you." It felt sincere, and for a while it was. We grabbed coffee, argued over zoning laws, kissed in the rain. He told me he admired my fire, my vision, the way I never watered myself down for comfort. But slowly I realized he didn't love me despite my background. He loved me because it made him look better, like a noble prince who fell for the underdog. And I played along because it felt like progress. I was wrong. The cracks showed during our first visit to his family's estate, a literal glass house with heated floors, designer fountains, and a piano no one played. My mom brought a handmade candle wrapped in brown paper. His mother took it with 2 fingers and said, "Oh, how thoughtful." Over dinner, she asked if my startup specialized in urban lawns. When I corrected her, she smiled as if I'd handed her a crayon drawing instead of a business. But the worst part wasn't what they said, it was what they didn't. They never asked about the mission, never asked how we built Urban Bloom from nothing, never once asked about the woman who made it all possible. They just smiled, nodded, and put me in a box labeled Humble Beginnings to display on the mantle of their empire. I should have walked away then, but like so many women taught to be grateful, I stayed. If you've ever stayed too long in a place that praised your story but silenced your voice, leave a comment below. Your truth matters. The closer the wedding got, the smaller I felt. Not because I was unsure about Adam, I was unsure about me in Adam's world. At fittings, I'd show up in sneakers while his mother brought swatches from Paris. During tastings, she dismissed my suggestions with a grin. "Oh, sweetheart, leave the palate to the professionals." Once she said my idea for local-sourced vegan options was sweetly idealistic, so very Rachel. Adam, for his part, tried to straddle both sides. "They just don't know you yet," he'd say. "Give them time." But time, it turns out, doesn't cure condescension. It feeds it. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of the printed wedding booklet draft on the dining room table. Adam's family had written our love story for the guests. It called me a visionary architect and social innovator. It praised my remarkable journey from humble beginnings to co-founder of Urban Bloom. Then, in small print, daughter of Pamela Morgan, a local hairstylist with a heart of gold. No last name, no mention of how she raised me alone after my father vanished when I was 4. No detail of how she turned a pair of scissors and raw grit into 25 years of stability for a daughter who dreamed of designing the world. Just heart of gold, like she was a house pet with soft eyes. I stared at the page numb, and for the first time I didn't feel included, I felt erased. I tried to talk to Adam. He sighed, rubbed his temples. "You're overthinking it. They meant well." "Meant well," I asked. "They rewrote my life to fit your brochure." "It's just PR," he said. "It's how these things work." I should have run then. But instead, I showed up to the rehearsal dinner, walked past custom centerpieces and polished crystal, and smiled for pictures that I now wish never existed. My mother wore a navy dress she bought on clearance and altered herself in one night. Her hair, as always, was perfect. She didn't complain when Deborah asked if she'd ever considered taking formal business classes to expand her salon. She didn't flinch when Ronald called her a true example of working-class charm. But I watched her fingers grip the wine glass tighter with every comment. Then came the comment from Adam's aunt. Is it true she never had a license, just taught herself in the kitchen? Followed by a laugh. I stood up, walked to the hallway to breathe. That's when I heard it. Deborah, chatting with a guest, not seeing me nearby. She said Rachel looked stunning today. Couture bride, no doubt. Her mother, though. Honestly, I thought she was the help. That's not a mother. That's a mistake in a dress. And then Adam's laugh. Soft, complicit, cowardly. I froze. And in that moment, every late night at the salon, every paper I wrote on the subway, every tear my mother hid behind a closed door, they all came crashing down in my chest. I walked back in, sat beside my mother, and whispered, We're leaving. She touched my wrist gently. Honey, don't. We can take it. But I was done taking. I looked her in the eye. No, Mom. We don't have to take anything anymore. And I stood up. I could feel the room slow as people noticed. Adam appeared beside me like a reflex. Rachel, wait. Don't make a scene. A scene, I said. You just laughed while they tore my mother apart. They're just joking, he pleaded. It's their style. No, I said louder now. It's not a style. It's cruelty dressed in couture. I turned to the room. Everything went quiet. Thank you for the reminder, I said. You've shown me exactly who you are, and exactly who I don't want to be. Then I took my mother's hand, and we walked. No apology, no explanation, no looking back. And in that stillness, that sharp inhale from 214 stunned guests, I found peace. If you've ever chosen truth over silence in a room full of polished cruelty, tell me what you felt in that moment. Your story deserves space. We stepped out into the night, not as bride and mother of the bride, but as survivors of a masquerade we never asked to attend. The valet tried to wave us toward the exit line, but I shook my head and pulled my phone from my purse. We're not going home, I said. We're going back, to where my mom asked, confused but calm. Where it all started. The diner. It was nearly midnight when we slid into our usual booth, the one by the window where we used to sit when I was 10, and Mom had just finished a 12-hour shift. She used to pull her shoes off under the table massage, her aching fingers, and joke that she could do a full highlight blindfolded by now. Back then, she always made me feel like we weren't poor, we were just in between dreams. The waitress brought over 2 cups without asking. She remembered us. As the steam curled from our mugs, I found myself talking not to vent, not to complain, but to remember. Do you remember when I did my first sketch here? I asked. Mom chuckled. You mean that napkin with the crooked windows and a fire escape leading nowhere? Yeah, I smiled. I said it was a community library. You said it looked like a pizza shop. She sipped her tea and nodded. But I saw the spark. I always did. I looked at her hands. Same hands that held scissors all those years. That stitched my prom dress. That handed me half a grilled cheese when we could only afford one. I think I forgot who I was, I said. Somewhere between the TED Talk invitations and the catered brunches and Adam's family, I started editing myself. You didn't forget, she said gently. You just got tired of translating your worth to people who couldn't speak your language. We didn't say much after that. The quiet was comforting, familiar. This place knew our pain and our perseverance. And as we sat in that booth, I realized something. I didn't need to fix what happened. I needed to rebuild from it. Because I wasn't just someone who walked out of a wedding. I was someone who had walked through fire for decades, arm in arm with a woman who'd never once let go. When we got home, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I opened my laptop. In a folder buried deep on my desktop were legal documents, purchase agreements, and silent shareholder agreements tied to various third-party holding companies. Over the past 6 months, I'd been quietly acquiring shares in Urban Core Group, the company Adam's family ran like a dynasty. At first it was just insurance. I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted my voice to count. But now it was purpose. I reviewed the percentages. 3 entities, 4 legal firewalls, clean ownership trail. As of the previous Friday, I controlled 52% of voting shares. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from resolve. Mom peeked into my room. You coming to bed? In a bit, I said. She studied my face. You look like your mind's all ready tomorrow. I am, I whispered. And in that moment, I wasn't Rachel, the runaway bride. I was Rachel Morgan, co-founder of Urban Bloom, and the woman who was about to take back everything they tried to steal. If you've ever rebuilt yourself quietly, brick by brick, in the shadows of people who doubted you, share that journey in the comments. We're not alone. And if you've ever stood up not to fight, but to reclaim, tap that subscribe button and join me. We're just getting started. The next morning was oddly still. The world outside was busy, pretending yesterday didn't happen, cars, honking, coffee brewing, neighbors walking their dogs. But my world was calibrated differently now, clearer, sharper, like someone had cleaned the windows of my life. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, I walked into the headquarters of Urban Core Group. The building was a polished glass and steel fortress on the corner of 28th, and Ash, a monument to legacy money and polished lies. Inside, the marble floors echoed with the sound of expensive shoes and carefully rehearsed conversations. People noticed me. Some stared, a few whispered, most avoided eye contact. The receptionist blinked twice. "Ms. Morgan, I have a meeting on the 5th floor." She hesitated, picked up the phone, then put it down without dialing. "Go right up." I stepped into the elevator, heart steady. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head more times than I could count. I wasn't walking in as a guest. I wasn't here as Adam's fiancée. I was walking in as the majority shareholder of the very empire that once treated me like a charity case. The elevator dinged. I stepped into the boardroom. They were already there. Adam, Deborah, Ronald. 3 board members. 2 men in navy suits who looked like they charged $1, $200 an hour just to exist. The air shifted. Deborah stood up, smile stretched tight. "Rachel," she cooed. "I wasn't expecting. I know I said setting a folder on the table, but you're going to want to see this." A silence thickened the room. Ronald adjusted his cufflinks. Adam looked at the floor. I opened the folder. Inside were notarized documents printed and signed. Ownership transfers, voting power breakdowns, legal trail all clean. Ronald leaned forward, frowning. "What is this, a shareholder motion?" "Not a motion," I said. "A change. As of 9:00 a.m., today the ownership structure of Urban Core has shifted. I now hold 52% of voting shares." The silence wasn't just stunned, it was suffocating. Deborah blinked. "You're joking." I looked her in the eye. "Does it look like I'm joking?" She reached for the folder. I let her read every word. 3 months of silent acquisition. 4 layers of legal shielding. No loopholes, no leverage left for them. "You can't do this," Ronald snapped. "This is personal." I tilted my head. "No. What you did was personal. This is just business." He stood abruptly. "You're retaliating because of the wedding. I'm acting because you used my name to win city contracts, used my work in your pitches, and kept me out of every room where decisions were made." "You were like family to us," Deborah cried. "We welcomed you." "No," I said calmly. "You paraded me." I stepped closer to the head of the table, Deborah's usual seat, and gently placed my hand on its edge. "You thought I was a symbol, a success story, a charity project turned gold. But I was the one building your future while you mocked my past." Adam finally looked up. "Rachel," he murmured, "this isn't you. You always said you wanted to be part of something." I turned to him, expression steady. "I did. I wanted to be a partner, not a prop in your brochure, not a bullet point in your family's TED Talk." I looked around the room at the power players, the legacy holders, the empire of polished cruelty, and said, "From this moment on, you're done. Your access to Urban Core ends here. All contracts will be audited, all pending approvals frozen. A full review of the last 3 years begins Monday." I saw it in their faces, panic masked behind entitlement. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of any of them. If you've ever been underestimated by people who smiled in your face, but dismissed your voice, tell me in the comments how you reclaimed your power. Because we're not waiting for a seat at their table anymore. We're building our own. I left the room without slamming the door. That would have been too easy, too dramatic. And they didn't deserve a show. What they deserved was silence. The kind that wraps around entitlement and chokes it with reality. Behind me, voices rose. Adam stammered something to the board. Deborah whispered frantically into her phone. Ronald barked at one of the suits, demanding they find a loophole. But there wasn't one. I'd made sure of it. Every contract, every share, every clause. 3 months of meticulous prep. I didn't just walk in with power, I walked in with proof. Downstairs, the receptionist watched me approach. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice a notch above curious. I smiled. Everything just got clearer. I stepped out into the city, the sky unusually bright for a Monday morning. My heels clicked against the sidewalk with the confidence I hadn't felt in months. And for once, I wasn't walking into someone else's world. I was walking in mine. By noon, whispers had turned into headlines. Urban Core faces internal shakeup. New leadership, new questions. Insider overthrow or strategic reclamation. None of the reporters got the story right yet. But they were circling. and I let them. Sometimes it's better to let people wonder, to let your absence raise more questions than your presence ever did. That night, I returned home to find Mom sitting at the kitchen table reading an old paperback novel and sipping chamomile tea. The lamp above her flickered slightly, casting a golden hue across her tired face. I sat down across from her. "You did it," she said without looking up. "You knew." "I've known since you were 6 and argued with a landlord about why we shouldn't be charged extra for a broken radiator," she smirked. I laughed, then paused. "Do you ever wish you'd fought back more?" I asked. "Said something when they looked down on you." Mom set the book aside. "No," she said, "because I knew one day you'd speak loud enough for both of us." We fell into silence again, but this time it felt like exhale. The next morning it began. A quiet headline in a local architecture blog, "Urban Core Audit Reveals $3 million Budget Discrepancy." Then a story in the Post, too, contractors paid no deliverables, no sites. Then Bloomberg, cronyism allegations, rock Urban Core real estate dynasty. The avalanche had started. Adam didn't call, Ronald didn't threaten, Deborah vanished from social media. The investors, however, didn't stay quiet. One fund issued a public statement. "We are reassessing our relationship with Urban Core pending the outcome of the audit." Another dropped out mid-negotiation. One even demanded a refund. And me? I was in my office at Urban Bloom. No glass floors, no mood lighting, just plants, brick walls, whiteboards filled with ideas about public benches and walkable cities. My assistant poked her head in. "There's someone downstairs. Says it's personal." I didn't need to ask. "Adam," I said. She nodded. I took a deep breath. "Send him up." He walked in looking smaller, not physically but in presence. His shirt wrinkled, hair messy, confidence shaken. "Rachel," he said. I didn't respond. I didn't know about the contracts, I swear. My mom and Ronald? I raised a hand. "Stop. You don't get to rewrite this. I miss you. Not the company. You." His voice cracked, but his eyes were still scanning the room. Looking for sympathy, looking for control. I shook my head. Love isn't what you feel when it's convenient. It's what you defend when it's hard. He opened his mouth to protest. I stood. "You stood there, Adam. When they mocked my mom. You laughed. I didn't just lose a partner that day, I realized I never had one." He looked stunned. I walked to the door. "You should go." He hesitated. "I still love you." "No," I said. "You loved the idea of me, the story of me, but not the woman who lived it." And with that I closed the door behind him. If you've ever had to let go of someone who didn't see your worth, share it below. Because every goodbye we choose for ourselves is also a hello to something better. And if this story echoes something in your heart, leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe to this channel. We're building a community for people who rise, not just survive. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of watching headlines multiply, of receiving carefully worded legal threats, disguised as concerned inquiries of investors scrambling to save face, and PR teams issuing statements like lifeboats on a sinking ship. Urban Core had become a parable. A cautionary tale whispered in city offices, architecture forums, and late-night emails between developers. And I kept building. Urban Bloom thrived in the shadow of their collapse. Requests poured in, cities looking to repurpose abandoned lots, nonprofits seeking design partnerships, even student architects asking for mentorship. And still, the question lingered. Had I gone too far? Not out of regret, but because the silence that followed victory can be louder than the war. That's when the invitation came. A woman from the mayor's office asked if I would speak at a conference on urban renewal, not just the architectural kind, she added pointedly. She said the city wanted to recognize Urban Bloom's impact. But more than that, they wanted to honor something else. "You didn't just redesign neighborhoods," she told me. "You held a mirror to a system." I accepted. But only on one condition. The scholarship? I wanted to launch a program funded by Urban Bloom, endorsed by the city, managed independently. Full-ride architecture scholarships for girls from underserved communities. Girls like I used to be. Girls who stared out bus windows at buildings they didn't think they were allowed to enter, let alone design. They agreed. At the launch ceremony, I stood on a modest stage in a rec center gym, not some gilded ballroom, and accepted a plaque from the mayor for contributions to urban and moral renewal. I didn't prepare a speech. I just spoke from the same place I always had my gut. I didn't grow up with a legacy fund, I began. No land, no name. Just a mom with a blow-dryer, a chipped mug full of tea, and a belief that hard work isn't weakness, it's power. The room went quiet. "I don't want to tear things down," I said. "I want to build. But sometimes before you can raise something honest, you have to rip out what's rotting beneath." Afterward, reporters asked the usual questions. Did I feel vindicated? Would I take legal action? Would I return to Urban Core if they restructured? I answered none of them, because the point wasn't what they lost. It was what I'd reclaimed. That night, I returned once again to the diner. Same booth, same flickering light, same chipped table where my future once felt impossible. Mom sat across from me, sipping her tea. You didn't have to do all this, she said gently. You could have walked away. I smiled. I didn't do it to prove something. I did it to end something. She raised an eyebrow. I ended the story they wrote for me, I said, and started writing mine. She tilted her head. You always were stubborn. Learned from the best. We sat in silence, then laughter. The kind that isn't loud but whole. Because here's the thing, no one tells you about power. It's not about titles or shares. It's about choice. And that night I chose again to sit beside the woman who taught me to hold my head high even when the world looked down. If you've ever had to reclaim your own story, especially when others tried to rewrite it, tell me how you found your voice. There's room for it here. And if this story left a mark, share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. Like, comment, subscribe, and let's keep building together. The scholarship, which I named the P Foundation P for Pamela, took off faster than I ever imagined. Applications flooded in. Handwritten letters, voice memos, digital portfolios filled with raw sketches drawn in spiral notebooks and dreams written in all caps. They came from Detroit, from Fresno, from a town in Alabama I'd never even heard of. Some were from girls living in shelters. Some from daughters of janitors, seamstresses, warehouse workers. Girls who had never stepped foot in a museum, but could explain how sunlight moves across a broken window. They weren't asking for handouts. They were asking for space to become who they already were. And reading their stories, I saw my mother again. I saw myself. Each acceptance letter we sent felt like setting a bone that had been fractured in silence for too long. I wasn't just giving them money. I was giving them the message no one had given me early enough. You belong here. And just when I thought the past was done with me, it came knocking again. One afternoon, my assistant appeared in the doorway of my office with an odd look. There's someone downstairs, she said. Wants to deliver something personally. I frowned. Who? She hesitated. Deborah Kramer. I didn't flinch. Not externally, but something tightened in my chest. I stood, straightened my blazer, walked down the stairs. There she was. Still in heels, still wearing soft pink lipstick and a cashmere coat like armor, but her eyes were not the same. They had that clouded sheen people get when they've finally run out of mirrors to talk to. Rachel, she said. Ms. Kramer, I replied. What brings you here? I thought maybe you'd hear me out. I didn't respond. She handed me a small envelope. No logo, no return address. It's not a threat, she said, just truth. Maybe a little too late. Then she turned and walked away, her heels echoing off the tile. Back in my office, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter handwritten. Not legal, not manipulative, just oddly human. She admitted to knowing about the missing funds, about the contractors with no credentials. She wrote that Adam had begged her to stop the bleeding, but Ronald wouldn't listen. She said she knew they'd used me, paraded me, and that she hated herself for being proud of it. At the end, she wrote, You didn't just take the company. You held up a mirror, and we saw ourselves. I set the letter down, not sure what to feel. Anger, closure, pity. I felt nothing. Because I had stopped looking for apologies a long time ago. An hour later, I got a call from the city. Urban Core had been blacklisted. 2 board members had fled the country. Ronald had liquidated everything. Deborah was reportedly on sabbatical. And Adam, still silent. But I no longer needed to hear from him. His silence now belonged to him. That evening, I walked to the community garden in Lower East Side, one of our first urban bloom projects. It had once been an abandoned lot filled with rusted bikes and cracked concrete. Now it was sunflowers, painted benches, and kids playing tag between garden beds. One girl no older than 10 sat sketching on the sidewalk. I knelt beside her. What are you drawing? I asked. A treehouse, she said, but like one anyone can use, like a reading tree. I smiled. That's brilliant. She looked up at me, squinting. You're that lady on the news. Maybe. She grinned. My mom says you make buildings for people who never get buildings. I laughed. I guess I do. And at that moment, I realized I wasn't rebuilding from the ashes of what they burned. I was planting something new. If you've ever had to stop chasing apologies to start chasing your peace, share that shift in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it. And if you believe in second beginnings, not just second chances, stick around. Like, comment, subscribe. The story isn't over. It's just getting its roots. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who once sat in corner offices with skyline views, dismissing community projects as low ROI, were now the ones quietly disappearing from the city they once claimed to own. Urban core had crumbled, not because I brought it down, but because it had been hollow all along. I simply turned on the lights, but one door still remained unopened. Adam. He hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't even posted a cryptic quote on social media like his mother had the week the audit results went public. Growth comes through storms, not blame. Yeah, okay. I figured he was gone. Probably somewhere off the grid, licking wounds and composing a narrative that made him the collateral damage in a messy takeover. But I was wrong. 9 days after the collapse, as I wrapped up a design presentation for a City Hall initiative, my phone buzzed. The front desk guard's voice crackled over the speaker. "Miss Morgan, you've got a visitor." I didn't ask who, I already knew. "Let him in." Adam entered like a man walking into his own shadow. His suit was rumpled, his tie crooked. Eyes ringed with exhaustion, but still scanning, still looking for an angle, a script away to turn this into something redemptive. "Rachel," he said softly, "you look strong." I didn't respond. He sat without being asked. I didn't know he began about the contracts, about the false bids, about any of it. My mom and Ronald kept me out of the back end. "You knew about the mockery," I said, "and you stayed silent." His face crumbled. "I thought it was just how they are. I didn't know it would hurt you that much." "It didn't hurt me," I replied. "It hurt her, and that should have been enough." He looked down. I stood up, walked slowly toward the window, where the light filtered through the iron frames, one of our early renovation touches. "I remember something you said," I told him, "back on your rooftop in Brooklyn after our first fight. You said, 'If the world falls apart, I'll stay. I'll protect you.'" He smiled weakly. "I meant it." "No," I said, turning to face him. "You meant to mean it. But the moment the world started cracking, you didn't stay. You watched. You laughed. And when I walked away, you let me go like it was an inconvenience." He stood too, now desperate. "I made a mistake, I miss you." "I believe you," I said. "But here's what you don't understand. Missing me doesn't entitle you to me." He exhaled hard, swallowing words he'd clearly practiced on the way over. "You said you wanted to build something with me," he muttered. "Something real." I nodded, and I did. I just didn't realize I'd have to build it without you. He stepped forward. "I still love you." "No," I said, my voice like steel beneath silk. "You love the version of me that made you look evolved. The woman from the diner who polished well into your family photo. But you didn't love the fire, the boundaries, the truth." I paused. "I wasn't your partner, Adam. I was your prop." He didn't deny it. He didn't cry. He just stood there. "You can go now," I said. He lingered, waiting for a crack in the wall. There wasn't one. Finally, he turned, walked toward the door, and vanished into the hallway. I sat back down. The room felt bigger, not because he left, but because the space he used to occupy was now filled with my own voice. If you've ever realized someone only loved the edited version of you, drop your story below. Your unfiltered self deserves more than performance love. And if you're reclaiming your space, your power, your breath, stay here. Like, comment, subscribe. You're not rebuilding alone. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded. No more surprise reporters waiting at the elevator. No more City Hall staff whispering updates. No more boardroom emails filled with half-threats and veiled apologies. Urban Core wasn't just a fallen empire, it was a void, and no one missed the echo. Meanwhile, urban bloom soared. We secured 2 new municipal contracts, one with the City of Providence to transform an abandoned bus depot into a public art square, and another in Cleveland for a community-led redesign of an old textile warehouse into a co-op workspace. The work was messy, beautiful, and real, just like it was always meant to be. But what stuck with me most wasn't the professional wins, it was the letters. Letters from girls who had just been accepted into the P Foundation's first cohort. One wrote, "When I saw your name on the acceptance email, I screamed so loud my grandma thought I broke something. I did. I broke the lie that I couldn't ever be more than a waitress." Another simply said, "My mom's a cleaner. I'm going to be an architect. Thank you for making room." And then there were the visits. They started small. 2 girls from Newark showed up at Urban Bloom's office just to see where the magic happens. One of them asked if I kept my old sketches. I pulled out a box from the storage closet labeled Napkins and Nightmares. She cried. So did I. Mom came by that afternoon and saw them on the floor with me spreading drawings across the rug. She said, "Feels like the beginning." I said, "It is." Then she handed me a gift-wrapped box. Inside was an old pair of shears, her first, rusted, dull, beautiful. "I'm retiring," she said, smiling, "but I wanted you to have these. You cut through more than hair now." I held them like they were gold. They were. Later that night, she and I returned once again to the diner. The waitress recognized us now. She brought our drinks without asking. We sat in silence again, that sacred silence. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I asked. She stirred her tea. "I wish your father had stayed gone before I let him do damage." I laughed. "That's not what I meant." "I know," she said. "But honestly, no. Because if things had gone right, we wouldn't be here." She looked around the diner like it was a cathedral. "This was always enough," she said. It was. But now we had more. More seats at the table. More girls who believed they belonged. More sidewalks where forgotten voices could speak in steel and glass and green spaces. And me? I was no longer the girl polishing herself into acceptability. I was the woman building structures around truth. If you've ever stopped apologizing for how far you've come or how hard the road was to get there, leave your story below. Your scars are not shame, they're survival. And if you believe in reclaiming your name, your story, your voice, hit that like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. We're designing more than cities here. We're rebuilding belief. The whispers of the past often lingered in unexpected places. One afternoon, as I was reviewing new urban bloom proposals, my assistant alerted me to an unexpected visitor downstairs. My heart skipped a beat when she said, "It's Deborah Kramer." I took a deep breath and headed down. There she was, poised and polished as ever, but with a shadow of vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "Rachel," she began, her voice softer than I remembered, "I came to give you something you deserve to know." She handed me a small unmarked envelope. "It's not a threat," she said quickly, "just truth, maybe a bit too late." Back in my office, I unfolded the letter. Her words confessed the hidden truths, the mismanaged contracts, the inflated budgets, and the ignored warnings. She wrote about how Adam begged her to stop the bleeding, but Ronald refused. She admitted to feeling guilty for how they treated me and my mother. At the end, she wrote, "You didn't just take the company, you held up a mirror, and we saw ourselves." I stared at the letter. No anger, no triumph, just a quiet acknowledgement. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what had happened, not just to me, but to all of us trapped in cycles of power and silence. That evening, the city officially blacklisted Urban Core. 2 board members fled the country. Ronald liquidated his remaining shares below market value. Deborah disappeared. Adam remained silent, and I opened my laptop poised to write the next chapter. Because this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. If you've ever faced the truth too late but still found strength to move forward, share your story below. You are not alone. And if you believe in the power of truth and new beginnings, please like, comment, and subscribe. Our stories are stronger together. The collapse of Urban Core sent ripples far beyond the boardroom. Local news outlets picked up the scandal, exposing cronyism and corruption within one of the city's most powerful real estate families. Investors pulled out, lawsuits were filed, and the once celebrated empire began to crumble like a house built on sand. But amidst the chaos, Urban Bloom grew stronger. Our projects flourished, communities rallied, and the city began to recognize the value of genuine people-first design. One project, a once-forgotten public park in the Bronx, became a beacon of hope. Children played under freshly planted trees, elderly neighbors gathered on new benches, and murals celebrated the neighborhood's diverse history. That park was a testament to what happens when design honors the people it serves. Meanwhile, my foundation, the P Foundation, started awarding scholarships. Girls who had once seen architecture as a distant dream were now studying alongside me, designing their own futures. Their gratitude fueled my resolve. But success brought its own challenges. The ghosts of the past lingered in boardroom murmurs and whispered doubts. Friends warned me to be cautious, to guard my heart against the betrayals I'd already endured. Yet every morning I woke up with the same conviction: I was building something real. Not just structures, but legacies. One evening, while walking home, I passed the old diner. The neon sign flickered, inviting and familiar. I paused, thinking of all the moments that had shaped me there, the laughter, the tears, the quiet strength. I realized that no matter how far I went, no matter how high I climbed, my roots would always anchor me. And that was my greatest power. Because in the end, success isn't about the buildings you design or the shares you hold. It's about the lives you touch and the truth you live. If you've ever felt torn between where you come from and where you're going, share your journey below. Your story matters. And if you're ready to build your own legacy, join this community. Like, comment, subscribe. Together, we rise. It wasn't long before the final chapter of that family saga began to unfold. The media frenzy surrounding Urban Core's downfall escalated. Investigative reports uncovered layers of mismanagement, unethical practices, and favoritism that had been hidden behind polished speeches and gala dinners. 2 board members quietly fled the country trying to escape the fallout. Ronald's lavish mansion was suddenly listed for foreclosure. Deborah vanished from all public appearances. Adam disappeared too, his name nowhere to be found in the papers or social media. But the silence from him wasn't peace, it was defeat. Meanwhile, my work continued unabated. Urban Bloom was no longer just a project, it was a movement. Communities once ignored were now partners in reshaping their neighborhoods. Every park, every courtyard, every public space we reclaimed was a small victory against the old guard. At the P Foundation's annual scholarship ceremony, I looked out over a room filled with bright-eyed young women, their smiles wide with hope and determination. I saw in them the same fire that had driven me to fight, to leave, to rebuild. Standing beside my mother, I felt an overwhelming gratitude, not just for the life we'd endured, but for the legacy we were creating. That night I took the mic and said something I never thought I'd say publicly. I didn't grow up with a legacy fund or a powerful name. I had a mother with scissors in one hand and the strength of a storm in the other. I learned that hard work isn't a weakness, it's power. And sometimes to build something real, you have to tear down what's rotten beneath. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most was the faces in the crowd, women who understood. If you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or erased, know that your story is your strength. Share it below and remind us all of our power. And if you believe in building legacies beyond inheritance, beyond titles, like, comment and subscribe, the journey isn't over, it's just beginning. After everything, after the battles, the betrayals, and the public unraveling, I found myself sitting once again in that familiar diner booth with my mom. It was our sanctuary, the one place untouched by the judgments of the world, where the weight of expectations lifted, even if only for a moment. She looked at me across the sticky table, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "You didn't have to do all of this," she said softly. "You could have just let it go." I smiled, stirring my coffee. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was setting the record straight for us. For every girl who's ever been told she's less because of where she came from. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "You built more than a company. You built hope." We sat in silence, the kind that's both comfortable and profound. And in that silence, I realized this story wasn't just about me. It was about every person who has ever fought to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected on their own terms. Because true power isn't handed down through names or wealth. It's forged in resilience, honesty, and the courage to walk away from what diminishes you. As I look forward, I carry that lesson with me, a beacon guiding me through every challenge, every new beginning. If this story touched you, if you've ever had to reclaim your own voice or walk your own path, share your experience below. Your truth matters, and together we grow stronger. And if you believe in the power of choice, freedom, and building your legacy, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let's keep sharing, learning, and rising together. Life after that night was quieter, but not empty. It was filled with purpose. Each day I woke up knowing I was building something bigger than myself, a community of voices, dreams, and stories that deserve to be honored. I watched girls from my scholarship program grow into confident designers and thinkers. I saw neighborhoods once ignored blossom into vibrant hubs of culture and life. And I felt my mother's presence in every step I took, in every choice I made. The wounds of the past never fully disappeared. They became part of my story, a reminder of where I came from and why I fought so hard. But they no longer defined me. Instead, I learned that freedom is not just the absence of chains, but the presence of hope. It's the power to choose to stand tall and to create a life that reflects your truth. This journey wasn't just about taking back what was lost. It was about embracing who I am, flaws, scars, and all, and helping others find that same courage within themselves. So if you're listening now, know this: your story matters, your voice matters, and no matter where you come from, you have the strength to build your own legacy. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing. The best is yet to come.